Hello, welcome back. It's Sunday, and I'm here with the fabulous Chris Davies, who was MEP of the Year in 2014 and is my inspiration on understanding Europe and has been for a long time. Well, I mean, when the referendum came along, Europe was not my issue. I didn't know very much about it, but fortunately I knew enough about it from having listened to you to be able to see that the Out campaign was complete and utter insanity. So I got out there and started campaigning and listening to people, and I'm really glad I did, because it's only because I went and said, look, whatever the problems with the EU, this is a completely nuts referendum that just shouldn't be going on. That I learnt enough to talk to people now, and all the reporters say, you know, why did people vote out? And I know because I was listening to them, because you gave me the inspiration to campaign. So thank you for that. Things are going really well here. Been busy down in Seascale. Chris has been out handing leaflets, bringing people in to meeting to ask questions in detail. Did you want to say something there?
No, I was just reflecting on some of your comments. I mean, I was in the House of Commons for a couple of years in the 1990s.
Yeah, as an MP.
And I remember when I was there, I knew nothing about how the European Union worked. And I look now back at the House of Commons, and I think hardly anyone there knows how the European Union works either. And you asked about the referendum and why did we lose the referendum? Well, it's a legacy of governments who, after all, successive governments in the UK have been committed to European Union membership, just failing to explain how the partnership works. And of course the classic, which not only the British government but every government in Europe does, is to blame Brussels for things for which they actually support. And they've put their hands up and have endorsed Commission policies, and then try and distance themselves from the reality of them.
Yeah. Hi, Glyn. Nice to see you. If you're watching this, please share it onto pages, onto local pages, onto Lib Dem pages, wherever you like. Let's build an audience and take questions live so people can finally ask the questions that they want to ask to someone who actually knows what they're talking about. So I remember there are a lot of people out there who have very genuine frustrations with the bureaucracy of the EU and the fact that some things here are not run as efficiently as they might be because of EU law.
Really? Well, let's talk about the bureaucracy first of all, because we are supposed to be talking about the single market.
Go on then.
I mean, the great advantage of the single market is you don't have 28 different sets of regulations.
Yeah.
You have one set of regulations. Let's take the single biggest law that the European Union has, very much at the centre of the single market, which is on chemicals legislation. REACH, it's called, the registration, evaluation and authorisation of chemicals, designed to ensure that the many tens of thousands of chemicals used in our everyday life, in everything, in our clothes, in our cars, in everything, are safe for human beings and safe for the environment. If we didn't have REACH, then we'd have 28 different national registration systems.
Yeah.
So, where's the bureaucracy?
Yeah.
I mean, there is bureaucracy. It's a bureaucratic system, but if you want to export into the single biggest market that exists in the world, it's better to have one system of control than 28 systems of control.
But sometimes people get sent on courses or they're dealing with EU regulations and they just look at it and say, look, this could be better. And I think that's genuine. But the problem is they weren't challenged to consider the alternatives and how much more bureaucratic they would be. They just were presented as if you leave the EU, everything will be perfect and you don't need systems and processes that we do actually very efficiently.
Well, you're changing things. Within the EU, there are attempts to change things, to modernise things, to improve things, to update things all the time. And it just seems to me just to say, oh, well, we don't like some of this, so let's just withdraw, is cutting off your nose to spite your face. I mean, the object of a democratic political process is surely to improve life for everyone, and you engage with that political process in order to bring about relevant change. And that means winning over partners, winning over other countries, other governments, other parliamentarians to your viewpoint.
And what I saw happening round about 2010 was when we all got really fluent with social media and the internet and group email and all that, is that a lot of the problems with the MEPs being too remote and it being too difficult to change the systems and processes so they truly reflected what people wanted, they were being overcome because you could chat to anyone who wanted to chat to you in real time by group email. You could be very transparent in what you were doing. And so you could connect society and the regulations in the EU together much better than had ever happened before.
I'm not so sure I'm competent to talk on that in that way, because I'm partly a technophobe and too old really for these things.
Yeah, but you were doing,
but in terms of communication,
with email and
I tried
which hadn't been there before.
Well, maybe.
But
when I was in the House of Commons, we didn't even have email. Email came in after I left. So the European Parliament and its ability to communicate is in many ways much more sophisticated than has gone before. And yet, people do say MEPs, for example, are out of touch. I spent 15 years trying to stay in touch, and I was working on environment and consumer affairs issues, which are very relevant to people in Cumbria, people in any high street, who are simply buying things, want to know that the products they're buying are safe, are energy efficient, can be recycled and the like. But trying to communicate those messages, trying to get traditional media to pay interest in them, comes a point where you just simply say, I've knocked my head against the wall trying to get this message across in every way I can, and I'm failing, and I've got better things to do in my time, like try and improve the legislation.
And improve the legislation. Yeah, and I think you needed tools like this, like Facebook Live, where you could go on Facebook Live once a week, talk about what you're doing, taking any questions in real time. And yes, it would have a really small audience, but at least it's there so that when people say there is no communication, I can't be heard, you can just point to that and say, well, that's untrue, and the evidence is really there.
Well, I see that...
But unfortunately, we've unselected our MEPs who are really working hard, a lot of them, and have brought in UKIP plonkers who are just there to sabotage the system.
I couldn't possibly comment.
I can. It's great. Let's have a look at some of the questions coming in. So we've got one here from Nick Webb. Hello, Chris and Rebecca. Chris, what do you think will happen to EU environmental regulation after Britain leaves the EU?
Yeah. In 15 years of working on environment legislation in the EU, I never heard anyone seriously criticise it. Not in the sense, you hear about Brussels being remote and bureaucracy and too many regulations and the like. But when it came to environmental policy, hardly a word of criticism. Yeah. And it's interesting now, I'm president of Lancashire Wildlife Trust, very honorary position, but at least it allows me to keep involved in some of these issues. And all the environmental movements, wildlife trust movements and the like across Britain are concerned about what is going to happen. I mean, the very first directive, I think it was, the very first piece of legislation dealing with the environment was the Birds Directive back in the 1970s.
Right.
Designed to protect habitats. That was added and to give a legal shape. We can have international treaties between governments, but the point about an international treaty is it's very difficult to have an enforcement mechanism. An EU law does have ultimately an enforcement mechanism. Governments are supposed to keep to it, and if governments don't keep to it, they've signed up to it after all, then the European Court of Justice can be involved, and that the government concerned can be fined and potentially an unlimited amount until it properly enforces the law. Now, that doesn't happen very often because the simple threat of that usually encourages governments to do it. But without that sanction, we are in no man's land. We do not know whether this government or its successor governments are going to maintain the environment regulations that we have to protect our water supply, to protect our air, to protect us from dangerous chemicals, and to protect biodiversity. If they're going to maintain those more or less as they have been, as we have done, as they've been part of European law, or whether the free marketeers, the deregulators, are simply going to say, no, we don't need any of this stuff. Let's not worry about the quality of our water. Let's not worry about the chemicals. Let's not worry about biodiversity. Now, I can't see that happening, to be honest, because I think there'd be a public outcry if all these regulations were to be simply torn up and ignored. But if that's the case, then it's one of the arguments of saying, then why are we bothering leaving in the first place? If actually some of these regulations, many of these regulations, especially in the environmental field, are popular, people endorse the principle of them, then why are we pulling out of the European Union? For other reasons, I suppose.
Well, we've got the great benefit of leaving Euratom.
That's an interesting question too. Just on environmental regulation, to reply to Nick, I mean, we don't know is the answer. So many of the Brexit questions, there have been no negotiations as of yet, so we don't know what the outcome is, or even what is going to be put on the table. As for you've just mentioned the European the European nuclear treaties, effectively, which again come under the European Court of Justice, designed to ensure that all countries in the European Union are applying what I think most of us would regard as essential rules to ensure that nuclear reactors are operating safely in every country.
Yeah.
If one of those in Bulgaria, for example, was to fail, then, as we know from Chernobyl and Ukraine in past decades, the consequences are Europe-wide.
Yes, and it's not just about designing new reactors, which may be delayed because we're pulling out. It's about trading nuclear fuel as well, so we may struggle to import our fuel rods and so on. So it can actually damage the electricity supply as it currently is. So at the minute, our Lord Teverson is working, the Liberal Democrat Lord is working particularly on an amendment that will be debated in the House of Lords this week on Euratom at my request. And hopefully we'll make some progress, because it is complete and utter nonsense pulling out. There is no benefit whatsoever. Those agreements are there.
As far as I can see, it's simply because Euratom ultimately requires the European Court of Justice to enforce it.
And the
government is saying, no, not in reality, because we want those rules to protect us all across, in every country in Europe. And it's simply an ideological principle that, we don't want European judges, who of course include British judges amongst their ranks, we don't want the European Court to have any say at all, even when it makes good sense.
Thank you for your questions coming in. Thank you for sharing the video. Please do share the video. Remember, you can support this campaign at rebeccahanson.org.uk. You can donate. We are a roots-funded party. We rely on your donations. You can volunteer to help, and you can join the Liberal Democrats. Please do. Lots of people are joining. Let's take some more questions. Fisheries is something the Leave leaders have made much of. What is your take on whether quotas will increase outside the EU? What do you think, Chris? Because Chris knows all about fisheries. Chris led the reform of the fisheries policy that people said couldn't be done, and he just got on and did it anyway, despite Nigel Farage being on the committee. But we won't go into that now. Let's talk about the question. What do you think will happen to quotas if we leave the EU?
Well, again, we don't know. But what I think has to be said is that many of the accusations levelled against the common fisheries policy of late are simply out of date. I played only a part, in bringing about the reform of the common fisheries policy by trying to waken up the interests of parliamentarians in Brussels, in the European Parliament, to the importance of fisheries and the fact that for decades the ministers from each country have been meeting each December, usually agricultural ministers who put on a fisheries hat once a year to set quotas, have often and repeatedly been ignoring scientific advice, have been allowing overfishing to take place, and fish stocks have gone down. And I formed a group called Fish for the Future in the Parliament, on the grounds that if there was to be a future for fishermen, there was got to be a good future for fish. We have got to rebuild our fish stocks. Now, every 10 years, the common fisheries policy comes up for review. And this is, within the European Union, it is absolutely everything is set in Brussels. All the big guidelines about just how much fish can be caught and what the rules will be, what fish can be caught and what can't be. That and agriculture, the only ones where really is Brussels that has done these things. Although the European Commissioner for Fisheries recognised actually that this has gone too far, and there needs to be a lot of decentralisation so that fishermen from the various regions around the fishing grounds could have a bigger say in this. Now, what I wanted to do was as I say, wake up all those politicians who didn't come into politics for the sake of fish, to the importance of making sure we had a radical reform of the fisheries policy, and we put in place the fundamental principle that we shouldn't be overfishing. And that is what we've now got. In the law of the common fisheries policy says that by 2020, all the fisheries have to be geared to building up stocks to maximum sustainable yield, in fact above maximum sustainable yield. And the scientific recommendations that are put forward each year have to be followed over that period. And we're seeing that. I mean, if you remember 10 years ago, North Sea cod stocks were at risk of almost extinction. Now North Sea cod stocks are building up. Quotas are being increased year by year. More fish are available to be caught. Nothing like the levels we had back in the 1950s and 1960s. before the modern fishing fleet came in. And that's, I suppose, been one of the problems of European fisheries. The laws have never caught up with the fact that the ability to catch fish and the size of the fishing boats and the technology they employ has become so much more effective. The fish have not had a means of escaping.
So because we had the EU, we had a system through which you could work to put in place the quotas that would rebuild European fish stocks. How are we going to rebuild fish stocks so there are more fish for people to catch if we don't have those systems and processes for collaborating to work on that?
Well, again, one of the ironies of this is that Britain led the reform of the common fisheries policy. Okay, I may have played a part in the Parliament, but it was British ministers, both Labour ministers initially and then followed by Conservative ministers, who were leading the fight amongst the other governments to saying we've got to put in place a more sustainable approach. So it's ironic that having succeeded in this, having pushed for it, having got the policy changes we wanted, fisheries is now being used by Brexiteers to argue why we have to get out of the European Union. Now, as for the setting of quotas, after we leave the European Union, if that happens, then there's certain international agreements that will have to be kept, and it may well be that the changes and the ability of the British fishing fleet to fish on a wider area will be much more severely restricted than the UKIP type people have said in the past, because of these international agreements. There are and there was the freedom of the sea, and there were certain historic rights that nations, the fishing fleets of other nations, have to go into our waters, as we have the right to go into their waters. As for the setting of the quotas, well, I hope that we'll keep to the scientific evidence, and what we should also recognise, one thing that Brussels doesn't control is the balance between the amount of quota given to the big fishing fleets, the really huge vessels. I mean, the small Titanics in their own way.
Yeah.
And the very small fishing fleet of 10 metres or so. They're set by governments. Yeah, exactly that.
That's our choice anyway.
But they're set. So far as Cumbria is concerned, they're set by London. Every year, the decision is made what proportion of the total quota allocated to the UK will be given to the small fishing fleets. Yeah. Currently, it's about 4%. 4%. So the fishing fleets get 96% of the catch, and the smaller vessels, which employ more actual people, get just 4%. I think that balance is completely wrong. Because by and large, the smaller fishing fleets, around the coasts of Britain, they're the ones who fish in a much more sustainable manner.
Okay, quick question from me. So why are you wearing UKIP purple?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Look, if we had to, just remember,
is yellow not your colour, Chris?
Liberal colours over the years and party colours have varied from one region to another. So
I have been strongly advised not to wear yellow on the grounds that I will just look extremely anemic.
I didn't allow the British National Party to take over St George's, the flag of England, and I'm not going to allow the UKIP to take over purple.
There we go.
And say it's an anti-European colour.
Felt the need to lighten the mood a bit. Right, what have we got now? Nick Webb. Please keep your questions coming if you want to ask anything. We will have to go quite soon. Done 3 live events so far today, 3 more to go after this. Next we're in Ravenglass at 3:15, which means we have to leave here by 5:02 at the very latest, and we haven't had any lunch yet. And then in Millom Guide Hall, 5 till 6, and then it's our final hustings of the campaign, 7 till 9 in the Beggars Theatre in Millom. Wherever you are, get in your car and drive there now. Question from Nick Webb. Will existing EU laws be incorporated into UK law?
Well, so it's said. I mean, that's what the great what's it called? The Great Repeal Act, or the government is
the Brexit
theoretically going to propose within the next few months. Which simply says, look, the easiest way of dealing with the situation in the short term is to simply say that all EU laws will become British law, and we'll start from scratch. Well, not start from scratch. We'll start from that as a base. Now, the issue will be, well, first of all, just how many are we talking about? I think the European Parliament reckons there's about 20,000 different laws in this case, and that will actually have to be changed or examined and reviewed. And the question is, who's going to make those changes in future? I think this is going to be a real issue of sovereignty here, because the argument is, is the government, because there's simply so many here, and it will want to do things, so incorporate things and make changes and put these things into British law text rather than the European law text. I think you'll find government ministers saying, well, the only way we can do this is simply to allow ministers to sign off all these documents. And parliamentarians, I hope, will be arguing, but if you're doing that, then you're actually allowing the government, the executive, to take control of lawmaking. And Parliament should have the right to review all of these things as we go through the process.
Yet there are
otherwise
enough
you can
hours in the day.
Well, exactly. We're talking about 20,000. So how can you argue that Brussels has been, we're taking power back from some sort of central authority, when in practice it's not going anywhere near the people of Britain or their parliamentary representatives. There's a real risk. It will simply go to a stronger executive, which actually means decisions being made behind closed doors by civil servants.
Yeah, the decision that the vote of the referendum means that we want hard Brexit. I mean, what has that got to do with reality? That's just not what people were telling me. Very, very few people wanted a hard Brexit. Very few wanted to leave the single market. I know some did, but the vast majority who were voting out that I spoke to wanted other things, and they didn't think that voting out meant that. And all of a sudden, a very small group in government have decided we're going to do this. How is that democratic? How's that representation by the people? People are saying they don't want a second referendum. We need one because that is democracy. We need a choice between two options. We didn't have that first time. It's a crap use of democracy. Democracy is not perfect if you abuse it. If you have a referendum that's a choice between the status quo and trusting David Cameron, who's stuffing up on the Tory government, stuffing everything else up, and some kind of utopia that was not real, was never challenged to be defined. It should have been set up like the Scottish independence referendum, where those proposing an alternative to the status quo were required to set it out in a dossier 18 months in advance so that people could analyse it, see if it stood up, and choose between two options. Should have been like that. Complete Tory cock-up. Badly defended, really, really poorly done. What have we got? Predicted result in the election. Well, in the early days, the Labour Party found that a third of their voters gone. It's a lot more than that now. Wherever you go, people are saying, I can't vote Labour. Yet they need to vote for me. It's between me and the Tory. Who wants a Tory government being endorsed right now? Look at what they are doing. It's all madness. So please vote for me. We can win this. Very difficult to predict the result because no formal polls are being done. We're not getting the metrics, we're not getting the feedback apart from this overwhelming anti-Labour feeling. Lots of people saying I can't vote Labour, but they haven't yet decided how they're going to vote. Nick Webb, can the private sector be relied on to drive forward the green agenda with a government who are uncommitted to regulation? No! That one's an easy answer.
I accept that. There needs to be regulation, and that's the danger, that there are forces within this government who are complete deregulators.
Do you think Mr. Blair's analysis has helped?
Well, I think Blair's analysis was spot on. I mean, it's unfortunate that it comes. Obviously, the problem is it comes from Blair. Blair is tainted, and he knows he's tainted.
But he actually did it in a way that recognises that.
But I accept. I mean, I think it's helped. I think it's helped to say, by simply reminding people he is, after all, the most successful prime minister that's a former prime minister who's around at the moment in terms of the number of elections he won. Just reminding people that the idea that this decision to leave the European Union is cut and dried need not be the case. And it shouldn't be allowed to be stuck in concrete. Two options. You talked about a second referendum. Okay, I'm not sure. I don't like. I wish. Second referendum is difficult. Yeah. But
what else could we do, Chris?
The things are this. What's going to happen as a result when Article 50 is triggered and we have this up to 2 years in which to negotiate, but actually perhaps only 18 months before the European elections process starts. So really, we have about 18 months or so at best. One real danger is that we end up with a set of a hard Brexit, if you like, an agreement for Britain to withdraw from the European Union, which is really not what most people want, of a kind, that imposes penalties, for example, on Britain that we don't want to accept, or costs that we don't want to accept, or that we are thrown out of parts of the European Union, like, for example, the ability to have medical care when you're abroad,
and also to regulate
all
drugs
sorts of things.
Collectively.
And in those cases, I think the deal that the government, which is firmly committed to Brexit, has the best deal that the government has been able to secure should be put to the British people. Do we want this deal, or do we actually think we're actually staying part of the European Union would be better, and we'd like to withdraw?
So how would you put it to them if you don't do it?
Well, no, I think the people should have a right for a final say over the terms of our leaving, over the deal that Theresa May has come up with, before it is put to the European Parliament. And if the British people don't actually like the package, then before it's put to the European Parliament, then we should have the chance to say, just can we stop these things and let's think again. But the other thing is this: there's a very real danger, I think, that the whole thing will collapse. That we'll end up going out of the European Union. No,
the European Union will collapse.
No, not the European Union. No, that there won't be a deal. That we'll just go. That we simply won't be. We won't be able to agree, for example, on how much what our liabilities will be to be paid to the European budget. Our ministers won't be able to agree. The European Union negotiators won't agree, and so we're out with nothing. I mean, everything's just a mess. Now, we don't know where we are on trade terms. We don't know where we are on medical. We don't on budget arrangements. In all sorts of ways, it's just a mess. And the House of Lords, I think, this week is going to vote for amendments saying, in these circumstances, there must at least be another vote in Parliament over the package, and I think that's very, very necessary.
I've been really worried by a lot of our MPs there. They have a duty to behave in the public interest, and they're just being pushed around and agreeing to be pushed around to things they don't believe in.
Well, I think Theresa May said, no deal is better than a bad deal. I think that's completely wrong, frankly. No deal is an appalling situation. It's just. No one would know where they are. There'd be massive uncertainty. There'd be no arrangements for how the pieces could be picked up and put together again. No one looking to invest in Britain would say, well, would have any security at all about their future.
And people are watching MPs in the Tory party and the Labour Party just being pulled around and doing things they don't believe in, and thinking that's what politics is. You just have to advocate for things you don't believe in. And I like being a Lib Dem because we're all so passionate, and I feel everyone is very connected to what they honestly believe. And it's the whip that I saw working during the coalition government was one where if you disagree, you have to have a strong conversation and work out why you disagree. But
maybe
just
to be fair, I was elected in 1999 to the European Parliament. And alongside me was a young Swedish Liberal called Cecilia Malmström.
Right.
And Cecilia was the leader of a small Swedish Liberal group.
Yeah.
She sat alongside me in the European Parliament for a number of years. And then I think about 2007, she suddenly became the Swedish European Minister.
Okay.
Now, Sweden happened to be holding the presidency of the European Union at that time.
Okay.
Cecilia managed to go, who is great, I love her to bits, but and very sincere and very committed, good radical liberal. 1 minute she was attacking the governments from the Parliament point of view about something the governments were doing, and the next minute she was Sweden's European Minister, having to defend the entire Council of Ministers, including policies which she had been attacking 2 weeks before. She squirmed beautifully. I mean, and blushed terribly. But she did have to suddenly find herself in a position where she had to defend what previously she'd regarded as undefensible.
Because there are things that have to be both attacked and defended. I don't know enough of the details to fully understand the nuances of what you're talking about there. Perhaps we can do.
Well, it's
conversation for another day. We've got about a minute left, and then we need to stop, unfortunately.
Well, a lady has asked about Christine Hunter. Has asked about what will be the Lib Dems doing in the House of Lords next week. Well, as I see it from today, I mean the two issues are, first of all, saying that the Parliament should have the right to vote on the right to intervene effectively if there is a prospect of the deal of there being no deal of the talks simply collapsing. Mm-hmm. That's the fundamental issue. And I'm sorry, there was another one too, which completely goes out of my mind too.
So she asked, what are we doing in the Lords? And you said we should be pushing for Parliament to have the right to intervene if there's no deal.
Yeah, the other one is on European Union citizens and reciprocal rights for British citizens living abroad. I mean, there are, of course, many people who are holding European Union passports who've been living in this country for many years, who have got children here, and their position is still uncertain. At the moment, they're being used as bargaining tools by Theresa May. So the Liberal Democrats and the Lords will also be pressing to say, look, this may be a matter of negotiations between Britain and its former European partners, but we shouldn't be using individuals and their future as bargaining chips. The fact is, we have to have an outreach. Yeah, we want these people to stay. We want them to stay. They're contributing. They're deeply committed to this country. Almost certainly, their families are growing up here. And similarly, we want to protect the rights of British citizens overseas, and there needs to be a reciprocal arrangement.
The third thing is we're starting to chip out on particular aspects of hard Brexit, like Euratom, with the amendment that we've got in, that Lord Teverson's got in, and we're looking at other things as well.
Yeah, but that's a very sensible one.
And I think that's where we have to stop. So thank you all for watching. Please come to the events tonight. I will be back on air at some time tomorrow, and I'll try and publicise in advance when that's going to be. But this weekend is so mental, doing so many things, that I've just got to get through this weekend, and then we'll plan the schedule for Facebook Live for next week in the morning. Thank you for joining us. Bye for now.